everyone, it's Stephen from Tostemac, and welcome to our first ever Tostemac Podcast. And my special guest today is my mom.
Hi, everyone.
Now, usually, if you've seen Tostemac videos in the past, they're usually like scripted and heavily edited. Like there's some form of plan within the videos. There's some sort of structure. But the beautiful thing about the podcast is that we can just talk about whatever we want. Don't have to worry about special effects or green screens or any of that. We just share what's on our minds. It could be either on current events, maybe precious memories, or maybe something else going on. Could be anything, really. So the topic I want to go over for our first podcast is autism in the 90s. And the reason I wanted to talk about this topic for the podcast is I think the 90s were a critical moment in terms of like autism awareness and acceptance. Because if you think about it, before the 90s, people didn't really know too much about autism, and the medical experts would, unfortunately, usually recommend to institutionalize the autistic individuals, sadly. Of course, many parents would not take kindly to that, but that's how it was back then. But I believe after the 90s is when we started to see that shift in terms of providing more services for autistic people, providing more awareness and acceptance for the autistic community. But maybe I'm overthinking it. So, Mom, what was your experience? Because the 90s was basically my childhood, and there's very little I remember of during my time as a baby. So maybe you could fill in some gaps.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, as Stephen is saying, and correctly, the 1990s were a time where there was little information out there, but not a lot. The research was being done, but there wasn't a lot of talk about it. And in fact, when Stephen was born in 1991...
Yeah, 1991. 1990 was Daniel.
Right, 1991. So when he was born, however, and early on we saw that Stephen wasn't quite making the developmental steps as the book said when he should. Actually,
you noticed the signs faster than the medical experts did, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
like you were
true.
Talking to some doctors about it, and you were like, "Are you kidding me? I mean, come on! I see the signs."
Right. Well, what was happening is he has a brother who's 13 months older than him, and so what was happening is, having been a nurse, having been in pediatrics, and having taken care of special needs children during my career prior to having children, I noticed that Stephen wasn't making the developmental steps as he should have in the timeline he should have. And so whenever I would take Stephen to the doctor and I would bring it to their attention and say, hey, he's not sitting up on time, he was never a good feeder, and he's not walking, he's not doing a lot of things that he should be doing at this particular developmental step. Oftentimes what happened is the doctor said, oh, Mom, you're just seeing things that are not there. Or they would say to me something like, oh, well, you're just comparing him to his brother and you're expecting him to keep up with his brother. I couldn't get them to understand that that was not the case, that my nursing background, my developmental background already gave me the education to know that by a certain point, Stephen should have been sitting up. By a certain point, he should have been crawling or he should have been walking. And he just wasn't making those milestones. So yes, in the early 90s, we did have problems where parents were noticing that their children were different. And I say that in quotes because that's a lot of times what we were told. But nobody knew what we were talking about. And they were coming up with excuses. Luckily, I've got a sister who also had a child 4 months after I did, who was doing very similar things. And
that was Aunt Tina, right?
Absolutely. So we had the support of each other to say, something's not right. And we'd compare notes and we'd help each other. Well, then we also were able to reach back to my Nana, who was my father's mother. And interestingly enough, every time Tina and I said, well, Stephen did this or Nick did that, what did she say? Charlie used to do that. Charlie's my father. And
that would be my opa, my grandfather.
That's right. And the first maybe 5-6 times when she'd say that, Tina and I were like, oh, okay. Well, but then it started happening more and more. So finally got to the point where we asked Nana, so Nana, what else did Charlie do? Well, then she started describing behaviors that we were seeing in Stephen and Nicholas.
Nicholas being my cousin, for those that don't know.
Correct. Some of the other things that we saw going on was that when I took Stephen to the doctor, and they would expect him to do something, and he wouldn't. And I would say to them, and this was, of course, after we finally did get a diagnosis, I would say
Speaking of which, when did we get the diagnosis? Because, like, it sounded like you had a bit of a struggle with the medical experts before. So when was the point where you actually got the diagnosis?
Actually, I was very fortunate. Tina had gotten Nicholas diagnosed already, and so she had gotten a list, and back then they gave us a paper, and it said, if your child is doing 9 of these 11 things, he might have autism. And so she had gone to some specials up in Lancaster, California.
Okay.
She had gotten that information. She then called it to me. So now I was able to go armed to the physicians and say, Stephen's doing 1, 2, 3. Unfortunately, Stephen did all 11 of the 11 items. He didn't miss a beat on any of them. But even still with doing that, the doctors were very, very hesitant to say at 3 years old that Stephen was definitely autistic. In fact, they wanted to label him as, well, he's a little developmentally delayed. A little developmentally delayed? Are you kidding me? I'm watching this kid. I'm seeing what's going on. I've got her father. My father did this, and his cousin is doing this. This is not a little. This is something. So, yeah, Stephen is correct. I did have to actually fight a good fight to get that final diagnosis. And when I did get it, it was really a very valuable tool. Now, I'll never forget, Stephen, we were at the regional center in California where we got the final diagnosis of what Daddy and I already knew about you.
But you had to get the official diagnosis anyway in order to get the documents and to get the access to services. Yeah.
Correct. So the funny thing is we're all sitting around the table at the regional center, and you had been through a battery of exams of which you thought was just funny as all hell, because every time they asked you to do something, you grab onto what they give you and you'd look at Daddy and I and you'd start giggling. But you didn't know how to laugh. You just giggled. And so they finished all the tests. They called us back in. And the first thing they did, I'll never forget this, is they slid a box of Kleenex over to me. I'm looking at the Kleenex and I'm like, I'm not sneezing. Mark, are you okay? Sam, you okay? Yeah, we don't need this. We're good. And they were, Mrs. McAllister, we have something to tell you.
Oh, no.
Unfortunately. And they pushed the Kleenex back to me. We have some bad news for you. And I said, okay, what's the bad news? And they said, Stephen has autism. And I mean, they told it to me just like that. And I said, okay, fine, now that we got that, what are we going to do about this? Stop them right in their tracks.
It's like they prepared this whole sad scene in advance. Like they had a box of Kleenex, and I'm pretty sure they had a person in the back room with a violin ready.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I honestly think they were actually disappointed I didn't break into tears. And in fact, one of them even said, well, Mrs. McAllister, do you need a minute to come to terms with this? I said, Jesus Christ, I've had the kid for 3 years. What's to come to terms? Let's go. I want a plan. I want an action. I want us to do something. And of course, your dad, being practical too, he goes, what she said.
It's like, do you need a minute to go over this? I had more than a minute. I had years.
Yeah, I've been living with him, unless you're planning on taking him off my hands. So they weren't taking you off my hands, so we had to take you back home. So, be as that may. So, but that was a very typical scene that, and eventually Mark and I helped organize a support group in San Gabriel, in the California area, with the regional center for parents who were going through this. And that was a very similar story that we heard from a lot of parents. Now, albeit, some parents do have a harder time. And
right, because not much was known about autism other than it is a developmental disability, and there are some struggles. That was basically all they knew back then.
Right. And what Stephen said early on in the picture about the institutionalization, that actually was a common conversation.
Yeah, because it happened with Temple Grandin, or at least the recommendations anyway. There was a recommendation made for Temple Grandin, and I believe
Dan
a couple
Aykroyd.
others. Dan Aykroyd.
And the girl who played the mermaid, Daryl
Hannah?
Daryl Hannah.
I'm surprised you remember Daryl Hannah.
I remember a lot of things, honey. I'm not autistic. I can remember things.
Excuse you, I'll have you know, autistic people have very good memory.
And that is true, actually. But back in the 90s, they didn't think Stephen was going to be able to do about just anything, which is why they were approaching me and my husband with, oh, get over yourself. We're living with him. We know what he can do. Because, see, the other thing that was going on while all of this was happening is we were watching Stephen. And Stephen was doing things that other children at that age could not do. An example, we had a glass table. Stephen had a little ball.
Oh, I remember this story.
It's a jiggly ball, and I forget what the name of the toy was.
It was more like a vibrating ball. It was like a green ball with, it was like points, magenta, orange, and
pokes
yellow.
Coming out of it.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say pokes, because they didn't have the tips at the end.
It was blunt.
more like a flat surface.
Yeah.
More like a trapezoid kind of thing.
Yeah. And so Stephen absolutely loved, I mean, he would sit for hours and he would hold the ball.
Yeah, basically, I would whenever I could, I would grab that ball, and just flip the switch on, because not only did I like the bright colors, but I also liked the sensation. Yeah.
He loved that vibrating. Well, so what happened was he'd put the ball down, and because I didn't want to trip on it, I had put it on the table, but underneath the glass. Now, at that point, he was about 8 months old, and most 8-month-olds do not have object permanence. In other words, looking through that glass at that age, most children would try and hit the glass repeatedly to get to the ball. Stephen, on the other hand, had pulled himself up along the side of the table. He looked down through the glass, then he bent down and looked like this, and then he went back, and then without losing a beat, he went down, reached under, grabbed the bowl, and turned it on and proceeded to do his vibrator. Okay? That was very atypical. And most children his age wouldn't have been able to figure that out.
I mean, was it really that surprising, though? I mean...
for that age, that is surprising. That's not something typically at that age. So this was something we saw, okay? The other thing he started doing, and again, now mind you, we're talking 7, 8 months old. He wasn't really crawling around. He was sitting up a little bit. But when he had objects around him, he would kind of push them in almost where he was almost lining them up. And Mark and I looked at that and thought, okay, there's something in there. Okay. Now, he wasn't really talking. As a matter of fact, he didn't talk until he was about maybe 3, 4 years old.
Oh, that's a long story.
And the way that happened was I had a patient who had died, and his wife and I became friends. Well, she was very depressed, and she just, her husband died, and that was just the end of her life. Well, I went and got Stephen, brought him to her house, and between her porch door. Yeah, porch door and the fence was maybe 50 feet at the most. Well, at that time, Stephen could no more walk that distance without falling at least once or twice because his feet were not like this. He walked like this.
Yeah, like a couple other students in elementary school kind of walked and ran like that too, with their feet facing inwards. Mm-hmm. I never understood that though.
Right. It was remember you had large motor, poor muscle tone. And so you weren't holding your feet correctly. So anyway, what happened was I knew he was going to fall as he did. Well, long story short, he captured Louise's attention. He got over to her.
Louise is the name of the patient.
No, that was my friend.
Oh, friend, yes.
Right. And he put his little hand on her leg, and it was like the two of them had an instant connection. And he started talking Stephen talk, which nobody else understood. Louise did, because she had dealt with a nephew of hers who had autism. So she picked him up, put him on the lap. They had a conversation for a good 5 minutes, like they really understood each other. And from that time on, she became Grandma Louise.
And that was actually because when I got to her, that was when I said my first word, Grandma.
Right. That's right. That was his first word, was Grandma. And, but see, these are the things that we saw in Stephen that said, you know what? Okay, maybe he's not doing some things, but he's doing some other things. So we knew there was something in there. Not everybody back in the 90s had that kind of information available to them because the resources were not there. They were just beginning to form.
Speaking of which, that does lead to a rather unfortunate event that happened in, I think it was 1995, when there was an article in The Lancet done by the former medical person called Andrew Wakefield. I'm not sure whether or not you remember that article.
Yes.
Basically, for those who don't know, in 1995, there was an article in The Lancet by Andrew Wakefield saying that he found some sort of connection between autism and the MMR vaccines.
Correct.
Even though he stated that he was not able to prove it. Naturally, this got medical experts kind of scratching their heads and getting curious. So they did some research on their own. And what we found out was not only was there no connection between autism and the vaccines whatsoever, there was no connection, but it was later revealed, I think it was by someone else in The Lancet, that it was revealed that Andrew Wakefield should have come clean, that he was paid by lawyers to
Correct.
make that article. And these lawyers were against the whole vaccination thing, period. So what happened was the article was taken down and Andrew Wakefield had his medical licenses and credentials basically removed. Mm-hmm. He couldn't do it anymore. But unfortunately, by then, the damage had already been done. Correct. Because, again, as you mentioned, they were just beginning to get that critical and important research into autism. And this article did not really help because there are still people to this day that unfortunately still believe
their children.
That they still believe something that is not true. And the level of how stubborn those people can be, and I've actually talked to one or two people about this. It's like no matter what you present them with, you just can't convince them.
Well, there's a big fear. The thing is, to have a child on the autism spectrum, you have to understand it's a large spectrum, okay? There are some that the autism is so severe that, and in fact, there is a certain level of mental, we used to call it retardation. It's now
people
disability.
don't really use that word anymore.
We don't use that term anymore, but it's a disability. Their intellect is a little bit lower, their disability is a lot higher, and their resource needs are significant. Then there is the extreme end, the savant, which is someone who they're focused on one area, and that's where their talent is. It's often associated with someone who's got, musical talent, or someone who's got mapping talent, or someone who's got a mathematical, someone who can pick up a map and say, okay, let me tell you how to get from 210 Desert Inn. I'm going to take you back to 112 Maple Grove Avenue in California, and this is the path you're going to have to take. These are savants. But in between are the individuals who make the bulk of people with autism. And these are people that you're meeting every day. Back when I was growing up, we used to call them funny-looking kids. They were weird little kids because they did things that were different than we ever did, but we never gave it much thought of that. However, one of the other differences, back then, it was 1 in every 100,000 live births. Today, someone with autism is 1 in every, you ready, folks? Hold on.
Brace yourselves.
Hold on.
Are you bracing yourself? I don't see you bracing yourself.
Are you ready?
Nah, I don't think they are.
1 in every 44 live births. Do the math, folks.
At the point of this podcast, of course. And
Correct.
The reason for that is because we know a lot more about what to look for autism, and the research and the methods of diagnosis have improved over the decades. Mm-hmm. And the 90s was kind of that turning point
Right.
from like not understanding autism or recommending institutionalizing them to a point where we could start to understand them more and kind of integrate them more into society.
Correct. The other thing is, like when we started out with Stephen and all of this process, we were so blessed. I'm telling you, the teachers that Stephen has an infant, I'm going to give a shout out to one of his very first teachers. Her name was Charlotte Prinky. Charlotte, if you're listening to this, you were a blessing to Stephen, and you've been a blessing to so many other children, because she didn't quite understand the autism, but you know what she understood? She understood human nature. She understood that Stephen, and there were several Stephens in her classroom and 7 other children.
I think there was only 2.
Well, I'm talking about the type of student you were.
Yeah, there was Stephen M, and there was also Stephen E.
Correct. But there were other. There was Charlon. There was a couple other people.
Alex P, Alex
exactly.
G, Lucas,
all of these.
Carl. Let's see. There was Charles, Charlon, Brian, Lucas, Carl.
He's going to keep
Stephen
on
E,
going. You just
and there's
need
also
to
hold
ignore
on.
him.
Okay. There's I know there's a couple others. The classroom wasn't really that big. It was like
So here's what I'm going to say, because he won't stop. Yes, there were many, many more.
And then there was the teacher.
But Miss Prinky had the heart, the soul, and the spirit to understand.
And then there was also Mr.
that what Stephen and the rest of the students needed was someone who, A, was willing to watch them, listen to them, and she did something that a lot of the other teachers didn't do. She looked for triggers. See, back then we didn't know about triggers. A trigger is something that, so for example, Stephen's biggest trigger, believe it or not, people, ladies and gentlemen, yellow, the color yellow. I could take him into a store. If he saw something that was yellow, all he needed to do was touch it, and then he was okay. But if I took him where there was yellow and we walked away, we were headed for a meltdown. And it was, in fact, Miss Prinky who said, wait a minute. Every time Stephen has a meltdown, it's this one object. And then she put another object, it didn't work. She put something else yellow, and then she wrote, I'll never forget it, she wrote in his book, Stephen's trigger is yellow. And we worked on that. See, and she was an educator. So that was coming from the education. But when I took him, again, back to doctors and dentists and all these other professionals, when I would say, Stephen is autistic, they say, oh, he's artistic. No.
To be fair, I kind of made that mix up a couple times myself.
Autistic. And I would have to explain it to the doctors.
The difference is just one letter.
Yes, but the difference is a lifestyle.
Right, I meant in the spelling.
In the spelling, that's correct. And so in the 90s, we were building, ladies and gentlemen. We were trying to figure things out. And it was a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. We didn't have all the resources we helped build. One of the things that I ended up doing because of autism, I ended up joining Boy Scouts of America.
That's not until like way, way later. Like,
Correct.
What? Early 2000, mid 2000s?
Early 2000s.
Early
2001,
okay.
2002.
Yeah.
But see, I did that because Stephen craved socialization. He didn't know really how to, if you could tell Stephen a joke and he'd go absolutely flat on you. He wasn't picking up on why was everybody else laughing? And he would even say, why are they all laughing? Okay? Because he didn't get it. He didn't get how to read the audience. Okay? He wanted to. He truly, truly did, but he didn't know how to do it. So one of the organizations that we had joined, and there are many of them that you can join, but this particular one was Boy Scouts of America. I joined them only to find out that their special needs book had one line. Autism is a developmental disability. Amazing. They knew that much.
Well, I mean, to be fair, if the medical experts didn't really know too much about, like, what autism was at the time, then what exactly is the Boy Scout Association supposed to know then?
Exactly. And so the grassroots of this whole movement from the 90s on, people like my husband and I, the parents, because we had to advocate for the children. And then we learned mid-90s, it wasn't enough for us to advocate. We had to teach them how to advocate for themselves.
Right, because the problem eventually became that so many other people were trying to speak for the autistic community. And while it wasn't all bad, it wasn't entirely all good either. Because the idea that other people were trying to speak for actual autistic people. And I think that was one of the reasons why Ari Neiman, not sure if you've heard of him or not, created the Autism Self-Advocacy Network many years later in order to provide autistic people the platform needed to be able to, as you said, advocate for themselves, you know, give them a platform, a place where their voice can be heard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because the thing is, the only person who understands, you know, I've been Stephen's mother. So for
what are you talking about? You're always my mother.
That's what I said.
You know, you said you've been my mother.
Well, I'm resigning effective now.
Well, darn.
No, folks.
I guess I gotta look for a list of replacements here.
Don't worry, folks. Trust me, nobody wants him. He's gonna be okay.
Nobody wants me. This podcast is getting worse. First, you say you're like retiring from being my mother, so I gotta look through this list of potential replacements. And then the next thing you tell me,
it's blank, guys. It's
no, that's a couple pages down the road.
Still blank. So
and now you're telling me that nobody wants me. Good Lord.
That's right. You're mine. But no. So the idea is that while all those years back, I did advocate for Stephen, and I advocate for not only my other son, but in years have gone by, I've advocated probably for several hundred children in my roles within the schools, as a nurse, with Boy Scouts of America, in a variety of roles. But the thing is, I can only read what I'm seeing, but it's external. I can't see the commotion going on inside.
It's more like an outsider looking in.
Correct. And so we learned mid-90s how important it was to teach them how to advocate for themselves. Because, and I got to tell you, even today, there are times that sometimes I'll be in a discussion with either Stephen or Thomas, and they'll say something, and, you know, I'm not lacking of intelligence, but there are times that maybe I miss a point on something I don't understand, or I didn't interpret it the way they meant it.
Sometimes I have to explain it, but that wasn't until like years later where I could better learn to articulate what I wanted to convey. Because back then, my my language or my word selection was very limited back then, and actually, there were some sources that didn't really help, because I remember watching Forrest Gump, and there was a certain word that was said in there that, let's see, the teachers did not take kindly to it. When you heard it, you did not take kindly to it.
Don't remember the word.
Is the F word?
Oh.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. We don't play that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it, but I'm pretty sure.
You'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll know what that word is.
So the thing is, so within all this time of advocacy.
And if you try to type it, I'll delete it.
As he was learning and others were learning, guess what? I was learning too. Because, and this is something I always tell parents, you know what? Your child's not stupid. He or she has something in there. Sometimes the communication is locked. For Stephen, his communication abilities were locked till after he was almost 3-4 years old. But then once we unlocked it, you know, he did very well. So much so that by the time we moved and he was in 6th grade in Maryland, my now best friend Nisi was his teacher. She was awesome. But the thing, and
also very intimidating if you push the wrong buttons. Because let me tell you, Miss Armstrong, yeah, she definitely earns the Armstrong name. Not like she physically hurt us, but she knows how to put her foot down and like
and
make sure the class listens and pays attention.
And she did believe that when she told them, "I will come to your home and talk to your parents."
No. Let me tell that. I will tell that story. So, Ms. Armstrong, like, she's a nice lady. You just don't want to make her angry or mess up on, like, or like do anything bad, like during class sessions or assignments. Because there was one time where she was handing out the test, and there's this one student that said, I'm not going to take this test. And you know what she does? She doesn't try to, like, persuade him or try to force him to. All she does, she walks up to the desk and says, all right, E, and takes the test away from him. That's basically what she did. It's like, you made the choice, you live with it.
Exactly.
And there was one time, as Mom said, she told me, one day I'm going to come to your house and you're not going to be ready, or you're not going to expect it. And I was like, come on, get real. Because back then, my family and I were living on a military base, Andrews Air Force Base. So in order to get in, you have to have a military ID or some ID of some sort in order to be allowed, or something similar to, in order to be allowed into the military base.
Which
so
she had.
She had?
She had it.
Wait. You're telling me now that she had a military ID the whole time?
You didn't need to know that before now.
I thought you let her in. Because, like, that's the thing. Like, if one person has a military ID, then the other people occupying the vehicle can go too.
Steven?
So it's like, come on, you don't even have a military ID. There's no way you can get in. Then, I don't know how far it was after that. Then I am enjoying dinner, a nice plate of dinner. Then all of a sudden, I hear someone going through the door. I stop eating my dinner. I look up.
It was beautiful.
I was like, what?
It was beautiful.
What? It's like, I see my mom. And I see Miss Armstrong right next to her. And it's like she was looking at me with this sinister smile. I was like, hi, Steven. I was like,
gotcha.
Oh, no. Oh, no. This can't be happening. No. How is this? And it was like I got so scared. I was so scared. I just dropped everything, ran upstairs into my room.
Yep.
And if there was a lock on the door, I made sure it was locked. I was like, no. She's not going to get to me. But I thought you let her in. You're telling me now that she had a military ID.
So the reason we're talking
You people
about,
are scary.
We intended to be. But the reason to bring her up in reality was because of the fact that she had Stephen in the 6th grade. And during one of our parent-teacher conferences, what she had said to me was, Stephen will go to university. Now, up until now, we had not had that kind of encouragement. But she said to me something that was very important. She said, Stephen is extremely intelligent, but he sees the world through a different set of glasses. And see, I had never thought about that before. But she was right. Because when I thought back on some of the things that Stephen used to say and to do, like we had an occupational therapist come to the home because she was trying to work with him on social skills.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. She would bring, like, board games and toys, and I'm pretty sure she brought some sweets with her from time to time.
Oh, yes, she did. But the thing is, what she had brought, and it was funny because now at this point, Thomas is on the scene. Thomas also has Asperger's syndrome.
Nowadays we call it high-functioning autism.
High-functioning, right. So, but the thing was, I always had a rule to any of the therapists to come into the home. And by the way, that was the other thing in the 90s we worked very hard to get, and we did succeed, is that early detection, early treatment, early success.
Yeah, my dad always said, like, the sooner you get the diagnosis, the better, because that means the sooner you get access to the services and whatever you need.
And the resources. As a result of this, I had always mandated any therapist that came into the home. I don't have one, I have 3 children. Now you ask me, wait a minute, I've only ever told you about 2. That's because Daniel, my oldest, was what we call neurotypical.
He's normal.
I would never go that far.
Well, come on. I mean, he was causing trouble like a whole bunch of older brothers would.
Exactly.
Always causing mischief, always trying to get me into trouble and saying things. I mean, granted, we played video games a lot together, but he was still a troublemaker. He was a...
But the idea being is that I always said you don't do for one child what you're not going to do for the others. And so they were all very good so that everyone got to play whatever the games. One particular
That way it's not like one child that's getting special treatment over the other
Correct.
two. Not grooming, as they would say.
No, yeah. And so one of the things that she had brought one time was like a scrapbooking kit. And she brought a picture just to give them example. Well, Stephen, he took a look at it, put it together. Thomas did the same thing even faster. Now, mind you, Thomas is younger. Okay? He is what, 7 years younger than you? 6, 7 years younger than you?
And still finds ways to show off.
Yes. So he quickly did this. Now, Daniel, my neurotypical, took one look at it. He goes, I don't want to do this. He walked away. But the reality is that this is an example of the resources that were brought and other ways that we could show the world that, you know what? There was nothing wrong with my son. Either of them. And there was nothing wrong with all those other individuals on the spectrum. None of them. Here's what the thing is. They look at the world in a different way, just like Miss Armstrong said. You know, Stephen looked through that glass. And he didn't need to hit it to get the idea of permanence. He just reached down and he grabbed it. Thomas didn't need someone to say, okay, here are the instructions how you're going to put this together. He took a look and it was done. And a lot of the children that we had in the 90s that were on the spectrum, this was exactly what they needed. They needed people to stop talking and start listening. They needed people that wanted to say, you know what? Let me help. Let's give you the resources. Let's give you the therapy. Let's do the ABT. Let's do the music therapy. Let's do the animal therapy. Let's look at all of what they can do. Stop focusing on what they can't do. Because before you know it, they're going to be able to do it. And in fact, Stephen and Thomas and Nicholas and a lot of the children that Stephen started to mention in the other classroom, you know, today, a lot of them went to university. A lot of them graduated. Stephen graduated on top of his class. He was an award-winning photographer. What I shouldn't say was, he still is. Award-winning photographer.
Okay? I mean, it's been a while since I did photography. I mean, I kind of have to get a second camera. I gotta look around.
You got the point. Thomas can pick up just about any instrument, listen to something once, and play it. Well, I had an uncle who could do that. So now the question comes. Was my uncle on the spectrum?
And that was like so weird because like me and Dad were talking about it, and we were watching I think it was Joe Burnham or Bo Burnham. Yeah, Joe Burnham. He did a Netflix series Inside. No, it was a Netflix movie really. And there was these music pieces, and we would see another person react to it and just pick up on what notes, what chords, whether it was like a crescendo or whatever, and they were able to pick it up in no time flat. And Thomas is capable of doing the same thing, and me and Dad are just scratching our heads like, how is Thomas and so many others able to do that?
So the thing is, and I know we're getting close to time here, but the thing to take away from it, the 90s was really the beginning of the struggle, but it was also the beginning of something wonderful because a lot of really smart people came together.
I wouldn't say the 90s was the start of the struggle. The struggle was been going on decades beforehand.
But it was never as intense because the numbers were not as high. You know, with changes in our environment, in our diet, and, you know, and I, you know, when I grew up, they used to tell us, oh, the world rotates on an axis. Well, anybody who looks at the weather knows we're not rotating anymore. We're warbling, okay? You can go from a 30-degree to a 70-degree like this, okay? So that's a change. But I'm seeing a change in what people want to do, what people can do, what they're willing to do. And so there's a change in the genetics. I'm really convinced that, you know, the day is going to come, Stephen, where the people on the spectrum, if it's not already, you're going to outnumber those of us that are not on the spectrum. So then we're going to answer the question, who's the normal one?
That's really a big thing going forward, is kind of redefining the norm, because because the norms and expectations and current trends, they're usually set by neurotypical people, with the exception of a few here and there. But for the most part, it's like we have to follow these norms and expectations and deadlines. Otherwise, society may think there's something wrong with that person. But as the years go by, as we start to understand more about autism and how they're more integrated with society, like it's not just neurotypicals running everything, we may start to ask ourselves, what is the norm now? And understand that it's not going to be the same as the norm back then. It's going to be different, but the question is, how is it going to be different?
And I also want to bring up another point. I want you to think about something, folks. Your computer. Yep, autistic person did that. Most of the audio equipment that musicians use, autistic person did that. Some of the best comedies and some of the best movies and the best actors are on the spectrum. So, was that a norm?
That's probably a question for sometime in the future. But on that note, I think we're going to go ahead and bring an end to this podcast, because my battery's about to die. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. If you enjoy what you see, consider subscribing to Tostemac to stay up to date in our latest videos. And remember, since this is Tostemac Podcast Month, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to have 3 more podcasts ready for you. And we're going to add this to our regular schedule. They're going to take the place of the Tostemac Autism News. I'll explain that in a later video. And, yeah, that's pretty much it for our first podcast. Mom, thanks for being part of it.
I'm very happy to be here. And folks, thank you for listening. And you know, you've got thoughts on this. You know people on the spectrum. Why don't you send Steven some information on situations you've run into? Or maybe if you've got some question for us, I'd be very, very happy to answer.
Yeah, just let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next podcast, see you later.
Bye.